Nobody dies tonight, do you hear me? Nobody. Maya Reynolds screamed those words into the smoke-filled cabin while the helicopter fell out of the sky. Blood on her hands. 6 soldiers barely breathing behind her. Both pilots unconscious. No radio, no rescue. Nothing between those men and death except one woman who had never touched a flight control in her life and refused to accept what was already happening. She grabbed the cyclic with shaking hands, and in that moment, at 15,000 feet above enemy territory, Lieutenant Maya Reynolds made a decision that would change every life on that aircraft forever. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the end. Then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Maya Reynolds was in the middle of pulling off her boots when her radio screamed. She had been awake for 19 straight hours. Her back ached from the morning's equipment inspection. The cot in the corner of the operations tent had been calling her name since sunset, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she had actually believed she might get 4 hours of sleep. She did not get 4 hours of sleep. Reynolds. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain David Ortega, her commanding officer, and it had that particular flatness that meant the situation was already past the point of preparation. We have a team down, northern sector. 3 wounded, 2 critical. The extraction window closes in 94 minutes. Maya had her boots back on before he finished the sentence. Who's flying? She asked. Chief Warrant Officer Tanner. You know him. She knew him. 41 years old. 17 years of combat flight experience, the kind of pilot who talked to his aircraft the way other men talk to their dogs. She had flown with him twice. Both times she had come home. What's the condition of the bird? She asked, already moving toward the equipment bay. There was a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. Serviceable, Ortega said. That's not what I asked. Another pause. She's been patched. The port engine has been running rough since last week's maintenance. Ground crew says she'll hold. Maya stopped walking. Ground crew says she'll hold, or the flight surgeon signed off. Reynolds. Sir. 94 minutes. She started walking again. The helicopter pad was a rectangle of noise and wind and barely controlled urgency. Chief Warrant Officer James Tanner was doing his pre-flight walk-around when Maya arrived, and she could tell from the set of his shoulders that he had already had the same conversation with Ortega that she had just had. Port engine, she said by way of greeting. Tanner didn't look up from the rotor assembly he was examining. Ground crew says she'll hold. You believe them? He finally looked at her. He had the kind of face that had stopped bothering to hide what it was thinking about 15 years ago. I believe we have 3 men bleeding out in a mountain valley and a 90-minute window. I believe that's what I believe. Maya accepted that. She loaded her medical kit. The crew assembled fast. Besides Maya and Tanner, there was co-pilot specialist Rachel Adkins, 26 years old, and on her 9th combat mission, still at the age where she counted them. Then there was PFC Danny Okafor, the door gunner, who had recently become a father and showed anyone who held still long enough a photograph of his daughter on his phone. And finally, Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, the team's senior medic, a quiet Alabama man who had been doing this job for 14 years and had developed the habit of saying very little and meaning everything he said. Weather's moving. Adkins reported as they lifted off. Mountain wind advisory in Sector 9. Could get rough over the ridgeline. Could get rough, Tanner repeated with the tone of a man who had heard that particular sentence too many times to find it remarkable. They climbed into the night. For the first 18 minutes, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Maya monitored communications, ran her equipment checks, and kept her eyes on the terrain readouts. The mountains below were dark. Not dark the way mountains are dark when it's simply nighttime dark. The way mountains are dark when something has decided to go wrong and is waiting for exactly the right moment to do it. She noticed it first. Tanner. She keyed her headset. Enemy activity reports for this sector. Minimal, he said. Last sweep showed 3 to 4 contacts eastern ridgeline stationary. That was 4 hours ago. Yes. What's the latest? There was a pause while he checked. Same report. Nothing updated. Maya looked at the terrain below. She looked at the sensor display. She looked at the darkness that didn't feel like ordinary darkness. They should have updated, she said. 4 hours is too long in this sector without a sweep update. Reynolds, we're on approach. 18 minutes out. I know. I'm just telling you what I'm looking at. What are you looking at? She took a breath. Nothing. That's the problem. I'm looking at nothing, and I don't like it. Tanner was quiet for a moment. Then, neither do I. But they kept flying. The first sign was the radio. At minute 22, the frequency carrying the signal from the downed Special Operations Team, Sergeant First Class Caleb Hayes and his 5 men broke up into static. Not the static of distance or terrain, the static of interference. Adkins worked the controls. I'm getting blocked. Someone's running an active jamming signal in this sector. Friendly, Tanner asked. No. Wrong frequency pattern. Adkins looked up. Her face was young in a way that her expression was trying very hard to compensate for. That's hostile jamming. The implications landed on every person in that helicopter at the same time the way realizations do when they're the kind you can't unhave. If someone was running active jamming, they were not hiding. They were not the 3 or 4 stationary contacts on a 4-hour-old report. They were something else entirely. How far out are we? Maya asked. 11 minutes, Tanner said. His voice had changed. It was the voice he used when he was thinking faster than he was talking. We're committed. If we turn back now, those men die. If we go forward into a jamming field, we might all die, Adkins said. She said it plainly, not with fear, but with the precision of someone doing math. Might, Tanner said. Sir, Adkins started. They called for help, Tanner said. We said we'd come, that's what we are. Nobody argued after that. Not because they agreed without reservation. Because there was nothing to say that Tanner hadn't already said, and every one of them had signed up for precisely this kind of night, knowing that it existed. Webb, who had said nothing since liftoff, spoke quietly from his position in the rear. Whatever happens up here, I want it on record that Okafor still owes me $20. Okafor at the door gun laughed, the sudden involuntary kind that happens when something is exactly funny enough and exactly timed right. Man, I told you I'm paying you when we land. I'm noting the terms, Webb said. Maya realized she had been holding her jaw so tight it was starting to ache. She made herself release it. 8 minutes. At minute 7. Tanner banked them through a mountain pass, and the world below shifted. Maya saw the movement before anything else registered there, along the eastern valley floor, a pattern of heat signatures that had no business being where they were. Not 3 to 4 stationary contacts, not a small quiet patrol. Tanner. I see it, he said. Clipped, certain. How many? Too many. The jamming intensified. The helicopter's navigation display flickered. Adkins swore under her breath and started working backup systems. Then the radio crackled just for a second, just long enough, and through the static, Maya heard a voice. It was raw, ragged, operating somewhere past the point where voices were supposed to sound like voices anymore. Pinned down, they know we called, they're waiting. Do not approach the primary zone. I say again, do not approach. The signal died. Silence. That was Hayes, Webb said from the back. That was Sergeant Hayes. Nobody asked how he was sure. He was sure because he was Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb had been listening to people's voices at the worst moments of their lives for 14 years, and he knew. They know we're coming, Maya said. Yes, Tanner said. This is a trap. Yes. He didn't say it like a man accepting defeat. He said it like a man rerouting. Which means we're changing our approach. Adkins, find me the secondary valley, the one that doesn't exist on their map. Adkins pulled up coordinates. It's tight, real tight. We're talking 60 feet of clearance on each side. Can you do it? I can do it. She paused. Probably. Probably. Tanner repeated with something that was almost not quite but almost humor. He banked hard left. Done. The secondary valley approach was 3 minutes of the most precise claustrophobic flying Maya had ever experienced. She could hear the mountain walls through the fuselage. Not physically, but in the way trained people sense proximity. The pressure of solid rock moving past at distance that offered no comfort. Adkins called altitude and clearance numbers in a steady mechanical rhythm. Tanner responded to each one with corrections so small they were invisible, only felt in the slight lean of the aircraft, the subtle shift of the floor beneath Maya's feet. The wounded team came up on the sensor display at minute 2. 6 heat signatures huddled in a narrow cut between rock formations. Around them on 3 sides was something that looked like a search pattern, methodical, deliberate closing. "They're moving the cordon," Maya said. 12 minutes, maybe less, before they reach that position. "We'll be there in 4, Tanner said. "And then what?" "We can't land in a cordon. They'll take us the second we touch down." "We're not landing," Tanner said. "We're hovering. You're fast roping the team. Web assists. 60 seconds on the ground." Maya looked at the terrain readout. She looked at the moving contacts. She looked at the 6 heat signatures that were Caleb Hayes and his men. And she thought about what 60 seconds actually meant in a place where everything was moving against you. 60 seconds, she said. "Think you can do it?" "I can do it." She reached back and pulled her kit. "Okafor, you're covering me." "Ready," Okafor said. 4 minutes. They came in low, lower than regulations allowed, lower than common sense suggested, low enough that the rotor wash would be kicking up debris off the valley floor before they were close enough to see the men below. Maya felt the altitude change in her stomach. She was clipped to the fast rope rig equipment bag, secured, running through her mental checklist with the part of her brain that had been trained to keep working even when the rest of her was operating on something rawer than thought. She saw them when they were 40 feet up. 6 men in positions that told the whole story. 2 down. 2 more barely holding position. Hayes himself was upright, a rifle in his hands, his back to a rock formation, and he was firing short, controlled bursts, calm and precise, which meant that Caleb Hayes was either the most disciplined man alive, or he had simply run out of the capacity to be frightened anymore. The 6th man, positioned behind Hayes, had his arm extended straight up. Howe was pointing at them. He was telling them where to come. "Down," Maya called. She went. The rope was cold. The wind from the rotors hit her like a wall and kept pushing. She controlled her descent through pure mechanical habit training, overriding the part of her that was aware, fully, viscerally, undeniably aware, that the night around her was not safe. She heard firing below. She heard Okafor's gun open up above. She felt the rope vibrate with the helicopter's movement as Tanner held position against winds that were working hard to make holding position impossible. She hit the ground. "Hayes," she shouted, moving immediately. "Hayes, I'm Reynolds. I'm your extract. How many can move?" Hayes turned from his position. In the dark, in the noise, she got her first real look at him. A man in his early 30s who looked a decade older than that, in the way that only very specific experiences can age a person. His face had been cut not recently. There was dried blood on his jacket. His eyes were completely steady. "2 walking," he said. 2 I can make walk. Donovan and Park are down. Park's bad. I've got Webb coming behind me. Park goes first." "Roger," he shouted over his shoulder. "Simmons, Reyes, you're on the rope. Go, go, go." The next 45 seconds were the kind that expand. Webb came down 15 feet from Maya and went directly to Park without being told where he was, because he'd read the layout before he'd hit the ground. Maya moved Simmons to the rope, felt the tension, confirmed the signal, watched Simmons go up. She turned back to Reyes, got her hands on him, started moving, heard Hayes still firing, heard Okafor responding, heard something that was not the helicopter's engines, and not the wind, and not the firing. Heard an explosion. Not close, but not far. Not a grenade. Something bigger. "RPG." Okafor's voice came through her earpiece. "Eastern Ridge Line, they've got static." "Okafor." "Nothing." "Okafor." Hayes grabbed her arm. "Go. Get Reyes up. Go." "My gunner." "I heard it. Go. Now." She got Reyes to the rope. She confirmed. She felt the line take weight. She turned back to Hayes, who was now moving toward Park, and she moved with him, got under Park's arm, helped carry what needed to be carried. And somewhere in the motion, she was aware that the helicopter above was shifting. Not the shift of a controlled maneuver. A different shift. Tanner's voice came through, shattered and thin. We took a hit. Port engine, I can hold her, but you need to..." She heard Adkins say something urgent that the static swallowed. She heard the change in the rotor sound. Anyone else might not have heard it. Maya heard it. The port engine. The one that had been running rough since last week's maintenance. The one the ground crew said would hold. It was not holding. "Tanner," she said into the mic. "Status. Port engine failing. I have maybe 4 minutes before I lose rotor control. Get everyone on the rope, now." Hayes was already moving Park draped between them. The remaining men scrambled. Maya kept her body where it needed to be, kept her mind in the place where the checklist lived, kept her voice from doing anything other than what it needed to do, which was stay calm, because if she was not calm, then nothing around her would be calm. And calm was the only thing that had any hope of keeping the next 90 seconds from becoming the last 90 seconds of every life currently touching this rope. "Webb," she said into the mic. "Webb, I need you to pull from up top. 2 coming up, 1 critical." "I'm here," Webb said. "Steady. Send them." She sent them. Hayes looked at her while the rope was rising. "You're last," he said. "I know. How bad is the bird?" She looked at the way the helicopter sat in the air above them, the way it sat differently than it had when she'd come down, tilted by fractions, that added up to a truth she didn't want to say out loud. "Bad," she said. "Can Tanner get us home?" She thought about Tanner. 17 years. His voice on the radio not panicking, rerouting. "He'll try," she said. "Good enough," Hayes said, and then he looked at her with the directness of a man who had been in enough bad situations to know one when he saw it. "You scared?" She considered lying, decided against it. "Deeply," she said. He nodded once. "Me too. Let's go home anyway." The rope came back down. Hayes went. Maya clipped in and followed, and the ground fell away beneath her feet, and above her. The helicopter that should not have been flying was still flying because James Tanner refused to be the kind of pilot who stopped flying. She was 18 feet up when the port engine died completely. The helicopter lurched. Maya held on. What happened next happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The aircraft dropped, not in a controlled descent, not the kind you could anticipate and adjust to, but in the way that something drops when physics is no longer being negotiated. Maya felt the rope go slack for a fraction of a second that lasted an eternity. She felt the rotor above her change pitch in a way that meant Tanner was throwing everything he had at a problem that was beyond what everything he had was designed for. Inside the cabin, she could hear faint through the earpiece, faint through the rotor noise, people shouting. Not in panic, in urgency. The specific urgency of trained people encountering a situation they had trained for in theory and never expected to encounter in practice. She got herself into the door. Webb pulled. Hayes pulled. Hands that were not gentle and were not supposed to be gentle got her inside and flat on the deck, and then the helicopter swung hard right, and everyone who was not secured went to the left wall together. "I've got her," Tanner shouted, and his voice was the most frightening thing Maya had heard all night, not because it was afraid, but because it was entirely past afraid, operating at the frequency of a man who has decided that the outcome of this moment belongs to him and to no one else. "She's going to try to die on me, and I am telling her no. Adkins, full hydraulic assist, everything you've got. Already there." Adkins' voice was a match for his. "Webb, is everyone in? All 6 on the team, plus ours, everyone's aboard. Then hold on to something because this is going to be the ugliest landing of my career." "You're not going to land," Maya said. Silence. 1 second. Reynolds. "You're not going to land," she said again, pulling herself to her feet against the motion of the aircraft. "You're going to keep it in the air. I need 2 minutes, just 2 more minutes." "I can't give you 2. Tanner." She reached the cockpit doorway. She looked at him, at the back of his head, at the tension in his shoulders, at his hands on the controls, and she made a decision that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the kind of clarity that only arrives when every other option has been removed. "Look at me." He looked. "Give me 2 minutes," she said. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. 2 minutes, he said. She went back to the medical kit. Hayes was already trying to help. He had his hands on a supply case and was passing things to Webb. His 2 critical men, Park and a soldier named Dominguez, were on the deck. Park was breathing wrong. Dominguez had a tourniquet applied, but it wasn't right applied in the chaos of the extraction, and he was going to lose the limb if it stayed the way it was. "Park first," Webb said, and his voice was the voice of a man performing surgery in a falling building. "Airways compromised, I need..." "Here." Maya had the airway kit open before he finished. She knelt opposite him. The helicopter swung. Neither of them moved from their position. "Hold his head," Webb said. She held it. "Talk to me," Webb said, meaning Park, meaning everyone, meaning the situation, meaning all of it. "Park," she said close to his face. "Corporal Park, I need you to stay with me. You hear me? My name is Reynolds. I am not leaving you. You are not leaving. Do you understand?" Park's eyes moved toward her voice. It was the most important thing she had ever seen. "That's right," she said. "That's right, look at me. Keep looking at me." On her other side she heard Hayes. "Dominguez. Hey, Miguel. Look at me instead. Look at me." She reached one hand across without looking, found the tourniquet on Dominguez's leg. Felt the placement, knew immediately it was wrong. She repositioned it while holding Park's head with her other arm and talking. Still talking. Not stopping, because her voice was the only thing she could give them that cost her nothing and might cost them everything if she stopped. The helicopter shook. Tanner's voice. "1 minute, Reynolds." "I know," she said. Dominguez's tourniquet was right. She checked it twice. Park was breathing better. She looked up at Webb. He looked at her. "You're terrifying," he said. "I get that a lot," she said. The port engine was gone. But James Tanner, 17 years, 10 combat deployments, the man who talked to his aircraft, like it was family, had found something in the mechanical wreckage of that helicopter that was still alive. One engine running hard. Rotors working at the edge of their design tolerance. A set of hydraulics that were failing but had not yet failed. It was enough. It was barely enough. He got them over the ridgeline. He got them past the jamming field. He got them to a point where the radio screamed back to life, and Adkins was already transmitting, already calling in their status, already giving coordinates. Her voice precise and fast, and completely without tremor. And then Hayes was at Maya's shoulder, and Hayes said very quietly, so only she could hear, "I can see base lights." She looked out. He was right. They were going to make it. Not cleanly. Not easily. Not without everything that had just happened having happened. But they were going to make it, all of them, everyone, which was what she had promised herself when the night started, and what she had refused to release through every moment since. Tanner's voice came on the intercom one more time. "Everyone hold tight. This is going to be rough." And from somewhere in the back, it might have been Okafor. It might have been Simmons, one voice said with absolute sincerity. "Tanner, everything you do is rough." And for a moment in that broken aircraft, surrounded by wounded men, and the sounds of a machine holding itself together through sheer mechanical stubbornness, someone laughed. And then someone else. And then quietly, so did Maya Reynolds. Because they were going to make it. And sometimes in the worst nights, in the hardest moments, in the places where no reasonable expectation said that any of this should have worked out, sometimes, just barely, it does. The landing was not a landing. It was a controlled collision with the Earth, and the only reason anyone survived it was because James Tanner refused to stop fighting the aircraft until the aircraft physically stopped moving. The helicopter hit the base perimeter with enough force to shear off the landing skids and slide 40 feet across the tarmac before the fuselage caught on a drainage barrier and stopped. The rotor blades destroyed themselves against the ground. Metal screamed. The cabin inverted slightly, then settled. And then there was silence. the specific ringing silence that follows catastrophic noise and feels for one suspended moment exactly like death. Maya was the first one moving. She didn't know how. She would not be able to explain it later, not to the debrief team, not to the flight surgeon, who told her she had a fractured rib and a concussion and should not have been conscious, let alone mobile. She would simply say that she moved because moving was what needed to happen, and she had learned a long time ago that the gap between what your body says it can do and what it actually does under pressure is wider than most people ever discover. She found Park first. His airway was still clear. She had made sure of that before impact, wedging herself beside him and holding his head through the collision with her body as the brace. He was unconscious. He was breathing. Webb. She didn't raise her voice. Raising her voice would cost her something she couldn't spare right now. Webb, talk to me. Here. Webb's voice came from her left, strained but intact. Dominguez is stable. I've got Reyes. He hit the wall on impact, possible shoulder dislocation. He's conscious. Okafor. I'm good. Okafor's voice was shaking in the way voices shake when a person is telling the truth about being good, but their body hasn't caught up with the assessment yet. I'm okay. Adkins. Silence. Adkins. Louder now. I'm here. Adkins's voice came from the cockpit. It was thin. I can't, my harness. It's jammed. Tanner. Maya was already moving toward the cockpit. Tanner status. Nothing. She pushed through the cockpit doorway. Tanner was slumped against his harness, his head forward, and for one moment, that lasted longer than any moment had a right to last. Maya looked at him and felt something cold move through her chest. Then she saw the rise and fall of his shoulders. Slow. Too slow. But present. He's breathing, Adkins said. She was wedged against her seat at an angle that explained why the harness wasn't releasing. The frame had bent on impact, pinning the mechanism. Her face was pale. There was blood above her left eyebrow from where her helmet had shifted. I've been trying to wake him. He won't respond. Head injury, Maya said, reaching across and examining Tanner's pupils with her light. One reacted, the other was slow. He needs imaging. We need to move him carefully. She looked at Adkins' harness. Hold still. She pulled her multi-tool. The harness mechanism was crushed, the release tab bent back on itself. She worked at it without hurrying, because hurrying with a jammed mechanism accomplishes nothing except destroying the mechanism further. Adkins was breathing fast and shallow, the breathing of someone who is actively managing the awareness that they are trapped. Talk to me, Maya said, not looking up from the harness. Tell me something. Anything. I what? Anything. What's your mother's name? A pause. Patricia. Where does Patricia live? Baton Rouge. Nice city. Maya felt the mechanism give by a millimeter. You from Baton Rouge. Born there. Moved when I was 12. Talk faster, Maya said, and it took Adkins a second to realize she didn't mean the conversation, she meant the breathing. Adkins caught herself. Slowed her breath deliberately. I moved to Georgia. My dad got a job in Atlanta. Better. Another millimeter. You call Patricia. Every Sunday. You call her this Sunday. Adkins paused. No. We were on standby. Call her when we get in, Maya said. Don't wait until next Sunday. The harness released. Adkins gasped, not in pain, in the involuntary relief of a body that has been braced against confinement and suddenly isn't anymore. Maya caught her before she could move wrong and guided her out of the seat with the same care she'd use handling someone she knew was injured, because she didn't yet know that Adkins wasn't. Can you walk? Adkins stood, tested her weight. Yes. Then help me with Tanner. Outside the wrecked helicopter, the base had erupted. Emergency vehicles arrived within 90 seconds of impact. Someone on the watch rotation had seen the approach and called it in before the aircraft even hit the ground. Medical teams spread through the wreckage with the particular organized chaos of people who have trained for this exact situation more times than they can count, and hoped every time that the training would remain hypothetical. Hayes met Maya at the cabin door. How was limping? She hadn't noticed that during the extraction, which told her he'd been managing it deliberately so she wouldn't worry about it. His face was doing something complicated. It was the face of a man who had spent the last 40 minutes being the one who needed saving, and was now trying to figure out how to exist in a world where that had happened to him. Park, he said. Just the name. Breathing. Head trauma possible internal, they'll get him into surgery fast. Hayes closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, opened them. Dominguez. Tourniquet's right, he's got a chance at the limb. He nodded. He looked at the wrecked helicopter. He looked at Maya. You held Park's head through the crash, he said. Somebody had to. You knew it was going to be bad. I knew it was going to be what it was going to be. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Not the look of a man assessing a colleague. The look of a man rearranging something fundamental about his understanding of the world. You fractured something, he said. Right side. You're holding yourself different than you were 20 minutes ago. I'm fine. Reynolds. Sergeant Hayes. She met his eyes. You can argue with me about my ribs after your men are inside. Deal. He held her gaze. Then slowly, something that had been very tight in his face let go. Deal, he said. The base hospital at 2 in the morning has a specific quality to it, a hum of controlled urgency that runs beneath everything like a current. Bright lights, the smell of antiseptic and equipment. People moving with purpose and without sentiment, because sentiment is something you save for when the work is done. Maya sat in a plastic chair outside the surgical suite and let a flight surgeon named Captain Eliza Morales press her fingers along the right side of her rib cage while she looked at a point on the wall and thought about nothing in particular. Breathe in, Morales said. She breathed in. The pain was significant. She expressed none of it. 2 fractured, Morales said. Maybe 3. I need to image you. After Park. Park is in surgery. There's nothing you can do for Park right now. After Tanner. Morales looked up from her ribs. Reynolds. He saved all of us. I want to know he's going to be okay before I go in a machine. Morales held her gaze for a moment. She was maybe 35 with the kind of eyes that had seen too many people argue their own medical care to find it surprising anymore. Okay, she said. But you sit here and you don't move, and when I know about Tanner, you go immediately. No negotiation. Agreed. Morales left. Hayes lowered himself into the chair beside Maya, and he did it carefully, which confirmed what she'd suspected about the leg. He'd taken shrapnel at some point during the firefight on the ground. A minor wound by the standards of tonight, but the kind that stiffened badly when the adrenaline wore off. They're not going to let that go, he said. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. I know, she said. You flew a helicopter. I helped keep a helicopter in the air. Tanner flew it. Tanner was... Hayes paused, found the right word. Tanner was impaired for the last 8 minutes of that flight. Maya said nothing. I was watching from the cabin, Hayes said. I could see through the cockpit door. You were talking him through it. When he started losing focus, and he was losing focus, I could see it, you were the one keeping him on track, calling out the numbers, telling him what to do. I was relaying what Adkins was calling. Adkins was working the navigation. You were flying with him. She turned her head and looked at Hayes. He was not a man who embellished. He was not a man who constructed narratives for dramatic effect. He was a 14-year veteran who said what he saw with the same precision he applied to everything else. There's going to be an investigation, she said. Yes. They're going to want to know why a combat rescue specialist was in the cockpit. Yes. And what are you going to tell them? Hayes looked straight ahead. I'm going to tell them exactly what I saw. A pilot who was injured and an NCO who did what needed to be done. He paused. And I'm going to tell them that every single one of my men is alive because of it. I'll tell them that as many times as they want to hear it. Maya looked back at the wall. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. I'm doing it anyway. The news on Tanner came at 3:14 a.m. Morales appeared in the corridor with the face of a person carrying information that has 2 sides to it. Maya read her expression before she reached the chair and felt the tension in her chest do something complicated. "He's stable," Morales said. "Subdural hematoma, which we caught early enough that we can manage without surgery right now. He's going to need monitoring rest and about 6 months before anyone clears him for flight duty. But he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay." Maya put her head back against the wall. She let out a breath that she thought she might have been holding in some form or another since 11:47 p.m. "Now," Morales said with the tone of a woman who has been patient long enough. "You're coming with me." The imaging confirmed 2 fractured ribs, a grade 2 concussion, and a laceration on her left palm that she'd completely stopped noticing somewhere around the point where Dominguez's tourniquet had needed repositioning. The laceration required 8 stitches. Morales performed them with efficient economical movements and did not lecture Maya about the fact that she'd been operating with an open hand wound for approximately 90 minutes. "You're grounded for 3 weeks minimum," Morales said instead. "I understand. You'll need a psych evaluation before you return to flight status. Standard protocol for incidents involving." Morales chose the word carefully. "Extraordinary circumstances." "I understand." Morales tied off the last stitch. She looked at Maya with the expression she'd been suppressing for the last 20 minutes. "Can I say something off the record?" "Yes. I've been a flight surgeon for 9 years. I've seen people come off bad missions in a lot of different conditions." She set down her instruments. "You know what most of them have in common?" Maya waited. "They come in carrying it," Morales said. "Whatever happened out there, they carry it in with them. You can see it, the weight of it on them." She paused. "You're not carrying it." Maya thought about that. "I didn't say I wasn't carrying it. No. But you're not crushed by it. You're upright. You're asking about everyone else. You're—" Morales seemed to be working something out as she spoke. "What's holding you up?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "They're alive," she said finally. "All of them. That's holding me up." Morales looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded once in the way of a person who has just received an answer that they weren't expecting to find as complete as it turned out to be. "Get some rest," she said. "I mean it." She did not get rest. What she got was Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb appearing at the door of her recovery room at 4:30 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee that he'd obtained through means he did not explain, and a look on his face that she hadn't seen from him before, which was remarkable, given the night they'd just shared. "You should be sleeping," she said. "So should you." He handed her a cup and sat in the chair beside her bed with the unhurried ease of a man who had decided he was staying regardless of what she said about it. "Park's out of surgery." The coffee stopped halfway to her mouth. And the surgeon is cautiously optimistic, which in surgeon language means better than it could have been by a significant margin. He watched her. "The airway management you did in the aircraft," she said, "it made the difference. That if Park had gone another 15-20 minutes without that intervention—" He stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "Webb," Maya said. "Yeah." "Don't." He understood what she meant. "Don't make it about me. Don't build it into something. Don't." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just giving you information." She drank the coffee. It was bad coffee, the kind produced by a machine that had been optimized for availability rather than quality, and it was the best thing she had tasted in recent memory. "How's Reyes?" she asked. "Shoulders reduced. He'll be sore for a month. He's already complaining about it, which means he's fine." Webb's mouth moved in something adjacent to a smile. "Simmons is with him. They're arguing about something that happened in 2019 that I elected not to have explained to me." "Okafor." Okafor called his wife. Webb paused. "He was on the phone for about an hour. I walked past the family room, and I could hear her. She was not quiet about how she felt about his life choices." Maya felt something unlock in the center of her chest that she hadn't realized was locked. "Good," she said. He seemed to agree with her, actually. Webb looked into his coffee. "She's right, probably. About a lot of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Okafor showed me the picture again. The one of his daughter." "How old is she now?" 8 months. She looks like him. Exactly like him. It's slightly alarming. He paused. She's beautiful. Maya thought about Okafor's face when he talked about that little girl. The way he held his phone when he showed the photo with both hands. Careful, the way you hold something you know is the most important thing you own. He needs to go home, she said. When this is done, he needs to take real leave and go home. Yeah, Webb said. I think he knows that. They sat in silence for a while. The good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled because what's already in it is sufficient. Then Webb said, "Can I ask you something?" Yes. In the aircraft, when the port engine went and we were dropping. He looked at her steadily. Were you actually calm, or were you performing calm? Maya considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Performing, she said. Completely performing. Webb nodded slowly. I thought so. You were too consistent. Real calm has variations. You were like a metronome. He paused. It worked. That's all that matters. Is it? She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular attention of a man who does not ask questions he doesn't mean. What are you actually asking me, Webb? He took a breath. I'm asking if you're okay. Not operationally okay. Not I can function okay. Actually okay. The question landed differently than she'd expected. She'd been fielding versions of it all night, Morales's version, Hayes's version, and she had answered them all with the same competent deflection. This one didn't deflect. She looked at the wall. She thought about the moment the port engine died, the way the aircraft dropped, the way her hands had found Tanner's controls and held them while she talked him back to consciousness, back to purpose, back to the muscle memory that lived below the injury. She thought about Park's eyes finding her voice in the dark. She thought about Hayes saying go home anyway and meaning it completely. No, she said. Not to the wall, to Webb. Not yet. He nodded. Okay, but I will be. Yeah, he said. I know. He finished his coffee. We all will be. The debrief began at 0900. Maya had slept for 3 hours and 20 minutes, which was not enough and was what she had. She had changed into a clean uniform, which was the closest she could come to presenting herself as someone who had not just survived a crash landing, and she had eaten something from the mess that she could not have described afterward if asked. The debrief room held 6 people, besides Maya Captain Ortega, a colonel named Fitzgerald, who had flown in from command 2 intelligence officers whose names she did not catch the base. Legal officer, a sharp-featured major named Reeves, and to Maya's slight surprise, Sergeant First Class Caleb Hayes. Hayes caught her eye when she entered. He said nothing. He gave her the smallest possible nod. Ortega looked tired. Not the tired of a man who hadn't slept, the tired of a man who had been managing the institutional implications of what happened for the past several hours, and had discovered that institutional implications are more exhausting than most physical experiences. Lieutenant Reynolds. Colonel Fitzgerald had the measured, unhurried delivery of someone who had been leading briefings for long enough that he no longer felt the need to perform authority. Before we begin, I want to be clear about the purpose of this session. We are here to document what occurred, not to assign preliminary fault. Everything said in this room goes into the official record. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. He folded his hands. Tell us what happened from the point of your departure to the point of impact. In your own words, take whatever time you need. Maya told them. She told them with the same precision she had applied to everything else tonight, without embellishment, without self-protection, without omission. She told them about the jamming signal and her conversation with Tanner about the enemy activity reports. She told them about the secondary valley approach, the fast rope extraction, the RPG strike, and the port engine failure. She told them about Tanner's deteriorating consciousness and what she had done in the cockpit and what she had done in the cabin and how both had happened in practical terms simultaneously. She told them all of it. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Fitzgerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Major Reeves. Reeves had been taking notes. She looked up. You are aware, she said to Maya, in the careful tone of a person navigating a legal landscape, That an unlicensed individual operating flight controls of a military aircraft is outside the scope of your MOS. Yes, Maya said. Can you articulate why you made the decision you did? Maya looked at her. Chief Warrant Officer Tanner was incapacitated. Specialist Adkins was managing navigation systems. There was no other option. There were other options, Reeves said. You could have. With respect, Major. Maya's voice did not change in volume or temperature. There were no other options. I could enumerate them for you, but they all end the same way. 6 members of a special operations team and 4 aircrew, none of whom are alive to be in this room. I chose differently. Reeves looked at her. Something shifted in her expression, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. You understand this is going to require a full investigation, Reeves said. Yes, and that your flight status is suspended pending. Dr. Morales already told me. Silence. Then Hayes spoke for the first time since the debrief began. Colonel Fitzgerald. His voice was the voice he used when he was not negotiating, the voice of a man stating what is. I want my account of what happened in that aircraft to be part of this record, all of it, beginning to end. Fitzgerald looked at him. Of course, Sergeant Hayes, because what I watched Lieutenant Reynolds do in that aircraft. Hayes paused, not for effect, because he was choosing his words with the care they deserved. I've been in combat for 14 years. I've served with people who were extraordinary under pressure. What I watched her do simultaneously in that cockpit and that cabin while injured, while we were falling. He stopped again. There is no investigation outcome that changes what I know. She brought us home, every one of us. That's not in dispute. The room was silent again. Fitzgerald was looking at Hayes with the expression of a man receiving information he had already expected, but not in the precise form it had arrived. Thank you, Sergeant Hayes, he said. Yes, sir. Ortega, who had said nothing. For the entire debrief, was looking at Maya with something she couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't pride exactly. It was closer to the look of a man reckoning with the distance between what he'd thought he knew about someone and what it turned out they actually were. The investigation was formal, thorough, and took 11 days. During those 11 days, Maya was grounded, restricted to base, required to submit to daily check-ins with Dr. Morales, and 2 sessions per week with a psychologist named Captain Harlow, who had the demeanor of a person who had heard every possible version of I'm fine, and had developed a sophisticated taxonomy of what each variation actually meant. In their first session, Harlow said, "Tell me about the moment the port engine failed." Maya said, "I reached for the controls." Harlow said, "Before that." Maya was quiet. "Before you reached for the controls," Harlow said, "what were you feeling?" Maya thought about it honestly, because dishonesty here would cost more than it saved. She thought about the drop, the sound the engine made, the shift in the aircraft's behavior that announced without ambiguity that the situation had moved from serious to catastrophic. "Terror," she said. And then I reached for the controls." Harlow looked at her with the measured attentiveness that was apparently his resting state. "That gap," he said, "between the terror and the action. What happened in it?" Maya had not thought about this in quite those terms before. Nothing, she said, and then reconsidering everything, both. "Explain." "I didn't decide anything. I didn't think it through. There wasn't a moment where I weighed options and selected one. It was more like," she looked for the right language, "like the decision had already been made. By every training day, every mission, every time someone had relied on me. It was already decided. My body just executed it." Harlow wrote something. "Do you think that's courage, what you're describing?" "I think courage is what it looks like from the outside," Maya said. "From the inside, it just felt like the only possible thing." Harlow looked at her for a long time. "That," he said quietly, "is the most accurate description of functional courage I've heard in 9 years of doing this job." On the 4th day of her grounding, Maya went to see Tanner. He was sitting up in his hospital bed, which was an improvement from horizontal. He had the look of a man whose body was healing faster than his patience could accommodate. There was a book on his bedside table that appeared not to have been opened. "You look terrible," she said. "You look like someone who fractured 2 ribs and didn't mention it for an hour," he said. "How did you know about that?" "Webb told me." He looked at her with the steady, uncomplicated directness that she had come to associate with him. "Sit down." She sat. I was quiet for a moment, not struggling for words, gathering them. "I remember," he said up until about 8 minutes from the base, and then it gets uneven, like a recording with pieces missing. He looked at his hands. "I remember your voice." "You were responsive," she said carefully. "Was I?" "You were flying," she said. "The whole time, you were flying." He looked at her. "Reynolds." "I was relaying." "Reynolds." His voice was quiet but absolute. "I know what I was doing, and I know what I wasn't doing." He paused. "Thank you for not making it about your ego." She wasn't sure what to say to that. "You kept them alive in the back," he said. "Adkins tells me about Park, about what you did with your hands and your voice while we were dropping." He shook his head slowly. 17 years. I've never seen anything like what you did that night." "You kept us in the air," Maya said. "We kept us in the air," he said. And that was the end of it, because James Tanner was not a man who needed the last word, only the accurate one. On the 8th day, she heard about the recommendation. Hayes had submitted it formally through proper channels, with 5 co-signatories that included every ambulatory member of his team. The language was precise and unambiguous. The specifics of what he'd documented, what he'd observed with his own eyes in that cockpit and that cabin, constituted one of the most detailed first-person accounts of performance under catastrophic conditions that Ortega had ever read. He told her this in the corridor outside his office, not because he was supposed to, but because he thought she should know. "What kind of recommendation?" she asked. Ortega looked at her with the expression he'd worn in the debrief room. "The kind that doesn't get submitted unless the person doing the submitting is completely certain," he said. "The kind that changes things." Maya thought about what changing things meant. She thought about the investigation that was still running. She thought about the legal officer and the questions about her MOS and the boundaries of authorization. She thought about Harlow's sessions and Morales's check-ins and the fractured ribs that still announced themselves every time she breathed too deeply. "Hayes doesn't have to do that," she said. "No," Ortega agreed. "He doesn't." He looked at her steadily. "That's the point," he said. The investigation concluded 3 days later. The findings were detailed, measured, and in the section addressing Maya's actions, notable for the language used to describe decisions made under circumstances that fell outside the existing framework of regulations, written for circumstances that had never quite anticipated this particular night above the mountains of northern Syria. The official finding was this: Lieutenant Maya Reynolds had acted within the bounds of reasonable judgment under catastrophic conditions, in a manner consistent with the highest traditions of the service. It was not an exoneration exactly. It was something more honest than that, an acknowledgement that the rules had not been written for what happened up there, and that what happened up there had turned out against every probability to be the thing that brought everyone home. Ortega handed her the document in his office. She read it standing. When she looked up, he was watching her with the same expression he'd worn every time they'd been in the same room since that night. The expression of a man recalibrating the distance between what he'd known and what he now knew. "Sir," she said. "Reynolds." "What happens now?" Ortega took the document back, set it on his desk. "Now," he said, "you go see Morales, and then you go see Harlow, and then when they both clear you—" He paused. "Then we figure out what comes next." "And the recommendation?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is already in motion." Outside the window, across the base, she could hear something distant, indistinct. The sound of a base operating at its ordinary pace. People moving between buildings. Vehicles running the particular ambient noise of a place that exists to prepare for the worst and hope for ordinary days. She had been part of that noise for 2 years. She would be part of it again. But something had shifted. Not in the base. Not in the investigation or the recommendation or the 11 days of grounded waiting. In herself. She couldn't have said exactly what, or exactly when. Somewhere between the port engine failing and Tanner's voice saying, "We kept us in the air," something had settled into place, some understanding of herself that she hadn't had before, that had required precisely this particular night, with precisely this particular impossible set of circumstances to become visible. She was not the same person who had pulled on her boots at 11:47 p.m. She was not sure yet what person she was instead. But she was going to find out. Harlow cleared her on a Tuesday. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He simply looked at his notes, looked at her and said, "You're ready." Then he added in the tone of a man offering something he didn't give often, "Whatever you do next, Reynolds, do it the same way you did what you did up there, without waiting for permission from yourself." She thought about that for a long time afterward. Morales cleared her 2 days later, with the addendum that the ribs would remind her of their existence for another 4 to 6 weeks, and that she should treat that as information rather than an obstacle. "Your body is talking to you," Morales said. "The intelligent response is to listen, not obey listen." Maya had spent most of her life making exactly that distinction. Ortega gave her a week's administrative leave before reassignment, which she used to call her mother in Tucson, sleep in a real bed for 4 consecutive nights, and visit Tanner twice more in the hospital. By the third visit, he was arguing with the nursing staff about his discharge timeline, which she took as the most reliable possible indicator that he was going to be fine. "You're impossible," she told him, watching him dispute the merit of his physical therapy schedule with a nurse who had clearly heard every version of this argument before. "I'm efficient," he said. "There's a difference." "The nurse doesn't think there's a difference." "The nurse," Tanner said, lowering his voice by approximately 0%, "has never had to recertify after a 6-month medical grounding. I have. And I can tell you that the difference between doing it in 5 months and 6 months is entirely in the first 2 weeks. The nurse looked at Maya. Maya looked at the ceiling. "He's been like this since day 2, the nurse said. "He's been like this since I've known him," Maya said. Tanner, satisfied with this characterization, went back to his argument. The reassignment came on a Thursday. Ortega called her into his office at 0800, which was early even for him, and she knew before she sat down that whatever this was, it wasn't routine. His desk had 2 folders on it instead of the usual organized stack. He had coffee, not the good kind, the kind he made himself when he was thinking through something, and he'd been drinking it long enough that it was visibly cold. "Sit," he said. She sat. He opened the first folder. The recommendation Hayes submitted went up the chain. Faster than I expected, which tells me someone at command was paying attention before it arrived. He paused. "There are things in motion that I'm not fully at liberty to detail yet, but I want you to understand the direction. Sir, the investigation outcome combined with Hayes's documentation, combined with the flight recorder data and Adkins's formal corroboration." He tapped the folder. "There is a conversation happening at a level above this base about what your file actually says and what it should say, and whether those 2 things are currently the same." Maya kept her face still. "What does my file currently say?" "That you're a combat rescue specialist with an exceptional performance record and no flight qualifications." He closed the folder. "What Hayes's documentation says is that under catastrophic conditions, you performed functions that require flight qualification, medical expertise, tactical leadership, and psychological stability simultaneously, and that every person on that aircraft is alive because of it." He looked at her. "These are not in the institutional view the same person." "They're not wrong," Maya said. "About the file." "No, but they may be wrong about what the file should contain." He picked up the second folder and held it without opening it. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer it the way you answered Harlow, honestly. Not strategically. Honestly." "All right. Do you want to fly?" The question landed with a simplicity that made it heavy. Maya had been asked versions of it by her recruiter, by her first CO, by her father. A former Marine who had spent her whole childhood watching her run toward difficult things instead of away from them. Every time she had given the answer that was true in that particular context, which was usually something about her role and her team and the work she was doing, Ortega's question was different. It was asking something prior to all of that. "Yes," she said. He opened the second folder. "Then this," he said, sliding it across the desk, "is where we start." The document was a formal nomination for an accelerated flight training evaluation, a pathway that existed in regulation, but had been used fewer than a dozen times in the branch's history, reserved for individuals who had demonstrated flight-relevant capability under conditions that precluded normal qualification routes. It required command endorsement at the colonel level or above, corroborating documentation from qualified flight personnel, and a psychological clearance that Harlow had already provided. Fitzgerald had signed the endorsement. Tanner from his hospital bed in handwriting that was slightly less precise than usual due to the pain medication had provided the flight personnel corroboration. Maya looked at the document for a long time. "Tanner did this from the hospital," she said. "He submitted it before he agreed to the physical therapy schedule," Ortega said. "I'm told the nursing staff was not informed of this particular administrative activity." Something moved through Maya's chest that was not quite any single identifiable emotion, but was made up of several of them, layered the way things are when they're real, rather than simple. "There's no guarantee," Ortega said. "The evaluation is real, it's rigorous. You'll be assessed by people who don't know your file, don't know what happened, and won't make allowances for it. If you go through this, you go through it on what you can actually do." "I wouldn't want it any other way," she said. He looked at her with the expression she had now catalogued, the one that appeared when the distance between who he'd thought she was and who she turned out to be became visible to him again. "No," he said. "I didn't think you would." She called Hayes that evening. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping, a detail she filed without comment. "They showed you the nomination," he said before she could speak. "How did you know?" "Because Ortega told me he was going to, and because I know what time it is, and because you're the kind of person who calls the same day." A pause. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know yet." She thought about it while she said it. "Grateful, uncertain, a little..." She searched for the honest word. "Undeserving." There was a silence on Hayes's end that she had come to recognize as the sound of him deciding how direct to be. "I'm going to push back on that," he said. "Caleb, no, listen, because this is the thing I've been wanting to say since the debrief, and I've been sitting on it, and I think you need to hear it." His voice was not loud, not emphatic. It had the quality of something that had been thought through too many times to need performance. "You don't get to minimize what happened, not to me, not to yourself. What you did in that aircraft, the medical work, the cockpit, keeping 6 injured men functional enough to survive the landing, that is not something that happens because you got lucky or because the circumstances forced you. That is something that happened because of who you are. And you can be modest about it with everyone else. But I need you to own it, at least in private, at least with me. Because I was there. I saw it. And I'm telling you it was real." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "You're a very direct person," she said. 14 years, he said. "I ran out of time for indirect." "The evaluation is going to be hard," she said. "I know. If I fail it, you won't. If I do, Reynolds." And now his voice had something in it that was harder to categorize, something underneath the directness that was warmer and more careful. "The night the port engine failed, you grabbed those controls." He paused. "That was not someone who was going to fail." She didn't answer immediately. She was looking out the window of her temporary quarters at the base at night. The lights, the movement, the ordinary machinery of a place that continued to operate regardless of what any individual inside it was navigating. "How's your leg?" she asked. The shift in subject didn't throw him. "Better. They got the last piece of shrapnel out yesterday. I'm supposed to be on light duty for 2 weeks, which apparently means I'm supposed to stop running PT at Bo 500. Are you stopping?" "I'm modifying," he said, which was as close to no as it was possible to get, while technically answering the question. She smiled. She hadn't done that in a while. It felt less strange than she'd expected. "Take care of yourself, Hayes," she said. "You too, Reynolds." A pause. "Let me know how the evaluation goes." "You'll be first call," she said. The evaluation facility was 3 states away and operated under a program designation that appeared nowhere on publicly available documentation. Maya arrived on a Monday morning with one duffel bag and the specific internal quietude of someone who has decided that the outcome of this week belongs entirely to the work of this week and that nothing prior to Monday morning is relevant. The director of the program was a lieutenant colonel named Harriet Sue, 50 years old, former AH-64 pilot, with the compact physical authority of someone who had spent her career in aircraft designed to be extensions of the human nervous system. She met Maya in the initial briefing room with no preamble whatsoever. "Reynolds," she said, "I've read the documentation." "Yes, ma'am." "I don't care about the documentation," Sue said. "I mean that specifically and precisely. I've seen documentation before. I've seen people who looked extraordinary on paper perform ordinarily in the aircraft. I've seen the reverse. The documentation tells me why you're here. It tells me nothing about whether you belong here. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She looked at Maya with the focused attention of someone calibrating. "What are you afraid of?" The question had the same quality as Harlow's questions, direct enough to bypass the prepared answers and reach the real ones. "Performing differently when it counts than when it doesn't," Maya said. Sue looked at her for a long moment. "Explain." "In the aircraft, the real situation, everything worked. I functioned. I did what needed doing." Maya paused. "I don't know whether that was me or whether that was adrenaline and necessity and having no other option. I don't know yet which one it was." "And if it turns out it was necessity rather than capability?" Sue asked. "Then I need to know that," Maya said, "before someone's life depends on the answer." Sue was quiet for several seconds. Maya did not try to fill the silence. "All right," Sue said finally. "Let's find out." The evaluation ran 6 days. It was the most demanding consecutive sequence of experiences Maya had undergone, which was a sentence she applied with full awareness of the standard she was comparing it to. The first 2 days were ground school systems, aerodynamics, emergency procedures delivered at a pace that assumed you were either keeping up or revealing that you weren't, with no concession to either possibility. The instructor was a chief warrant officer named Vasquez, who had the teaching style of someone who believed that confusion was not a problem to be managed, but a signal to be read. "Why does the rotor stall in a high G turn?" he asked on the first morning, looking at Maya specifically. "Retreating blade stall," she said. "The retreating blade's angle of attack increases until it exceeds the critical angle, loses lift asymmetrically." "Where did you learn that?" "I've been in rotary wing aircraft for 3 years. You listen long enough, you learn things." Vasquez looked at her with the expression of someone reassessing a variable. "What else did you learn?" "Enough to know I don't know enough," she said, "which is why I'm here." He nodded once with the economy of a man who reserves nods for statements that earn them and moved to the next topic. On the 3rd day, she got into a helicopter for the first time since the crash. She had been expecting this to be harder than it was. She had discussed it with Harlow before leaving, the possibility of a physiological stress response, the body's tendency to associate environments with the experiences that occurred in them. Harlow had given her tools, breathing techniques, grounding protocols, the structured way of separating what was then from what is now. She sat in the left seat. She put her hands on the controls. She breathed. And then Vasquez said, "Tell me what you feel." And she understood that this was its own kind of assessment, not of her hands, but of her honesty. "Familiar," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Familiar." "The cyclic. The collective. I know how they're supposed to respond." She paused. "My hands remember things my logbook doesn't." "That's either very good or very concerning," Vasquez said. "We're about to find out which." What they found out over the next 4 hours and 12 minutes of dual-control flight that Vasquez later described in his notes as, "unlike anything I've assessed in 11 years of this program," was that Maya Reynolds had absorbed through proximity and observation, and the kind of attention that most people apply selectively, and she applied constantly a functional comprehension of rotary wing flight that existed somewhere below conscious retrieval. It wasn't skill in the trained sense. It was recognition, deep instinctive, the way a person who has heard a language spoken for years can understand more than they've ever formally learned. When Vasquez demonstrated a maneuver, her hands made the motion at the same time in advance, not following, but anticipating. When the aircraft responded in ways that diverged from expectation, she felt it before the instruments confirmed it. "You've been flying in your head," Vasquez said after the 4th hour. "I've been paying attention," she said. "Same thing for someone like you." That evening she called Webb. "How's it going?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "Good strange. I keep knowing things I didn't know I knew." "That's not strange," Webb said. "That's who you are. You've been doing that since before the crash. You just didn't have a context to apply it in." She thought about that. "How's Park?" she asked. "Walking," Webb said, and the single word carried everything. Relief, disbelief, the specific gratitude that comes when an outcome that was not guaranteed comes back right. "Short distances. He's got a long road, but he's walking." She put her back against the wall of her quarters and closed her eyes for a moment. "Good," she said. "He asked about you," Webb said. "Yesterday. He asked who you were." "What did you tell him?" "I told him your name, and then he asked who brought him home, and I told him that too." She didn't say anything. "He said he wants to thank you," Webb said. "Whenever you're back." "He doesn't have to." Reynolds. Webb's voice had the same quality as Hayes's, had the sound of a man who had earned the right to say the thing directly. "Let him." On day 5, Sue came back. She observed the morning session without speaking, sat in the briefing room, while Vasquez ran Maya through emergency procedure simulations, watching with the focused stillness of a person who is collecting data rather than forming impressions. Maya was aware of her presence the way she was aware of everything in an environment she was operating in, noted filed not dwelt on. After the simulation session, Vasquez stepped out. Sue did not. "Vasquez's notes," Sue said. "I haven't seen them," Maya said. "I know. I'm going to tell you what they say." She crossed her arms not defensively, the posture of someone settling in to be direct. "He says you're the most unusual candidate he's assessed in this program. Not the best technically, you're behind where someone with formal training would be, and you know it, and that self-knowledge is itself part of what he's noting. He says your procedural retention is exceptional. Your situational awareness is—" She paused on the word. He used the word preternatural, which is not a word Vasquez uses. "I want you to understand how unusual that is." "And?" Maya said. Sue looked at her. "What do you mean, and?" "There's a but in there somewhere," Maya said. "I can hear it." Sue was quiet for a moment, not because she was deciding whether to say it, because she was deciding how. "You control your fear," she said finally. "Extremely well. Better than almost anyone I've seen come through here." "That's a problem. In the aircraft, no. In the debrief room, no. In the emergency situation, absolutely not." She uncrossed her arms. "My concern is different. People who control fear as effectively as you do sometimes have difficulty with the inverse, with trusting the fear when it's trying to tell them something." Maya let that land. "You think I'll push past a warning signal?" she said. "I think you've trained yourself necessarily effectively to function through warning signals. That's the thing that kept 7 people alive." Sue's voice was even not accusatory. "I'm asking whether you know the difference between a signal to push through and a signal to stop." "Do you think I know the difference?" Maya asked. "I'm asking you." Maya thought about it genuinely, not for the performance of thoughtfulness, but because it was the kind of question that deserved the actual work of answering it. "The port engine," she said. "In the aircraft. I heard it starting to fail 20 minutes before it went." Sue's expression didn't change. "You told the debrief team you noticed the roughness before departure. I told them the ground crew report didn't match what I was hearing, which is not the same thing as telling them I knew it was going to fail." She paused. "I knew it was running wrong. I didn't know it was going to fail completely, and I made a judgment that the mission required proceeding and that the risk was within acceptable parameters. She met Sue's eyes. I was wrong about the parameters. But right about the mission, Sue said. Those men are alive, Maya said. So yes, but that doesn't make the judgment call correct. It makes the outcome fortunate. Silence. Sue looked at her for a long time. That distinction, she said quietly, is the one that keeps pilots alive, long-term, the ability to hold both things. The outcome was right, and the process was imperfect, and both are true simultaneously. She paused. Most people can't do that. They either excuse the process because the outcome was good, or they torture themselves over the process because any imperfection feels like failure. You have to hold both, Maya said. Otherwise, you stop learning. Yes, Sue said. Exactly. She stood, moved toward the door, then stopped. Vasquez is running you through night systems tomorrow. The final assessment is Saturday morning. I'll be in the debrief. Yes, ma'am. Reynolds. She didn't turn around. You asked whether you can trust yourself in the aircraft. The question isn't whether you trust yourself. The question is whether you've earned the trust. A pause. So far, you're earning it. She left. Maya sat alone in this briefing room for a moment. Outside, she could hear the rotors of a helicopter doing training circuits, the steady rhythmic presence of an aircraft in motion, working purposeful. She listened to it the way she listened to things that mattered. She had been listening to that sound for 3 years without knowing it was teaching her something. She knew now. Saturday morning arrived with the specific quality of mornings that mean something. Maya was up at Yo 445 not because she'd set an alarm, but because her body had decided that sleep was a completed activity. She went through her preparation with the methodical calm. That was, she had come to understand not the absence of feeling, but its organization, fear, and focus, and the clean anticipation of something difficult arranged into a sequence that her hands and mind could work through. The final assessment ran 4 hours. She wouldn't talk about the specifics afterward, not out of secrecy, but because the experience had the quality of something that exists fully in its own moment and resists accurate translation. What she would say to Hayes, and later to Tanner, and later still to Webb, was that she had never felt more completely herself than she did in that aircraft during those 4 hours. That something which had been partially formed, half understood, operating below the level of full articulation in her for years, something that the night above Syria had forced into consciousness, but not yet into completion, became in the course of those 4 hours finished. Not perfect. Finished. The way a sentence is finished, not because there's nothing more to say, but because it has said what it needed to say. Sue was in the debrief room when she landed. Vasquez handed her a bottle of water and said nothing, which she had come to understand was his version of a standing ovation. Sue looked at the documentation in front of her. She looked at Maya. There are things we don't do in this program, she said, formally. Things that aren't in the framework because the framework wasn't built for them. She paused. What I'm about to tell you is not on the record until it goes through command processing, which will take approximately 3 weeks. But I'm telling you now because I believe you've earned the right to know it now rather than through a document. Maya waited. The evaluation outcome, Sue said, is a full recommendation for flight training qualification, with a notation in the record that the demonstrated capability assessment supersedes the standard entry requirements. She looked at Maya with the directness that was her resting state. What that means practically is that you will pursue formal qualification. There are no shortcuts in this program. The training is the training, but you will pursue it with the full backing of this evaluation and everyone who conducted it. Maya absorbed this. It also means, Sue said more quietly, that the conversation Ortega referenced the one happening at a level above your base. That conversation now has this to point to. She set the document down. What happened on that helicopter was not an anomaly. It was not adrenaline and necessity alone. It was you, and the system is now officially catching up with that fact. Outside the window, the training helicopter was making another circuit. Maya could track it by the sound without seeing it, knew where it was in the pattern, what it was doing, what the pilot was working on. She had always been able to do that. She just hadn't known until now what it meant. "When does training start?" she asked. Sue looked at her, and for the first time in 6 days, something that was not strictly professional moved across her face. Not a smile exactly, but its structural ancestor. "Monday," she said. Maya nodded once. "Good," she said. And she meant it the way she meant most things, completely, without decoration, with the full weight of someone who has looked at what is coming and decided that she is ready for it. The training helicopter completed its circuit and came in clean, and she listened to it. Land the way you listen to something that is in every way that matters, calling your name. Monday came, the way significant Mondays always come, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, irrevocable quality of a door that has opened and will not close again. Maya reported to the flight training facility at 0532. She was the first one there. She stood outside the briefing room in the dark with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm during the walk over, and she let herself have exactly 3 minutes of stillness before the day began. Not meditation, not ritual. Just the act of being present before the noise started, the way you stand at the edge of water before you go in. Her primary instructor was a chief warrant officer named Del Torres. He was 44 years old, former 160th SOAR, which meant he had spent the better part of 2 decades flying at night at low altitude in places where the margin for error was measured in inches and seconds, rather than feet and minutes. He was not a large man, but he occupied space with the absolute economy of someone who had learned through long experience that stillness is more authoritative than motion. He found her outside the briefing room at 0533. "You're early," he said. "I'm on time," she said. "You're also early." He considered this. Fair. He looked at the lukewarm coffee. "That going to do it for you?" "It's going to have to." "There's better in the briefing room. Someone in this program has figured out that a flight instructor with bad coffee is a liability." She followed him in. The briefing room held 2 other student pilots, both male, both younger than Maya, by 3 to 5 years, both watching her with the particular attention of people who had been told something about someone before meeting them, and were now performing the recalibration in real time. She noted their attention, filed it, and gave it no further space. Del Torres introduced them without ceremony. "Reynolds Castillo Park. Yes, different park. I know. Let's get past it. You 3 are my cohort for this cycle. What you know going in is relevant only insofar as it doesn't interfere with what you're learning now. Past competence does not exempt you from present rigor. Are we clear?" "Yes," all 3 said at slightly different intervals, which Del Torres acknowledged with the expression of a man who has heard that answer approximately 8,000 times and remains appropriately skeptical. "Good," he said. "Let's talk about why helicopters want to kill you." The first week was ground school again, but at a depth that made the evaluation facilities version feel like a brochure. Del Torres taught the way a surgeon explains anatomy, not as a collection of facts, but as a system of relationships, each element connected to every other element, so that understanding one thing correctly meant understanding 20 other things simultaneously. Maya absorbed it the way she absorbed everything that mattered to her completely, without separating the interesting parts from the difficult ones, because she had long since learned that the difficult parts were almost always the interesting parts wearing a different coat. Castillo was technically brilliant, the kind of student who had already built the theoretical framework before the course began and was now filling it in. Park was methodical and careful, slower, but thorough, the type whose understanding would outlast everyone else's because he had never confused speed with comprehension. Maya was neither of these things. She was something that Del Torres, by the end of the first week, had decided he did not yet have a precise category for which was itself notable, given that he had a precise category for almost everything. "You learn sideways," he told her on Friday afternoon of the first week. "Sideways," she said. "You don't go in a straight line from not knowing to knowing. You go around the outside first. You observe the thing from the perimeter, and then you move in." He was looking at her the way Sue had looked at her, with the focused attention of someone trying to understand a mechanism they haven't encountered before. In 15 years of instructing, I've seen maybe 4 people learn like that. All 4 of them ended up being exceptional pilots. "That's a significant sample size," she said. I know, I'm telling you anyway. Why? He picked up his coffee. Because the fourth one almost quit in week 3, and I don't want you to quit in week 3. She looked at him steadily. What happened in week 3? You'll know it when you're in it, he said. That's the only useful way I know to prepare you for it. What happened in week 3 was the simulator. The simulation facility ran training scenarios that were by design not survivable, using the approaches a student would naturally attempt first. The scenarios were built by people who understood that the most dangerous moment for any pilot is the moment between knowing what they've been taught and knowing what actually works. The gap where knowledge becomes instinct, and where if the translation fails, people die. The first session lasted 2 hours. Maya failed 4 scenarios. She failed them not because she didn't know the correct procedures, she knew them, but because knowing a correct procedure and executing it correctly under conditions designed to overwhelm your ability to execute are not the same experience, and no amount of theoretical understanding bridges that gap except the specific experience of failing and running it again. She came out of the simulator and sat on a bench outside the facility and breathed. Castillo came out 15 minutes later. He sat beside her without speaking. He had failed 3 of the same 4 scenarios, plus 1 she hadn't. That was, he started. Yeah, she said. I knew all of it. I knew every single procedure. I know. And I still... He stopped, shook his head. That's what it's supposed to do, she said. The gap between knowing and doing. That's where we are right now. He looked at her sideways. Does that make you feel better? No, she said. But it makes sense, which is the step before better. He was quiet. Then, how many times did they tell you that you couldn't do something before Syria? The question surprised her slightly, not because it was inappropriate, but because it came from a different direction than she'd expected from him. Often enough, she said. And you kept going anyway. I kept going because I knew what I knew, she said. Other people's certainty about my limits never felt more reliable than my own experience of them. Castillo was quiet for a long moment. I grew up in a family where someone was always telling you what you were capable of, he said. And they were usually right. That's the problem. They were usually right, so I never learned to argue with them. Maybe that's what this is for, she said. This, she gestured vaguely back at the simulator. This specific version of failing. So you learn to argue with the limit instead of accepting it. He looked at her. You're a strange person to be learning next to, he said. Not unkindly, with the tone of someone making an honest observation. I get that a lot, she said. Del Torres ran them back through the scenarios on Thursday. The second time through was different in the way that second times through impossible things are always different, not easier, but no longer unknown. The body had a map now, even if the map was only the shape of where the wrong turns were. Maya failed 1 scenario. Castillo failed 2. Park, who had been running the scenarios in his head at night, failed none of them and accepted no credit for it, which Del Torres noted with visible approval. What changed? Del Torres asked Maya in the individual debrief. I stopped trying to execute the procedure and started reading the aircraft, she said. He looked at her. Explain. The procedure is the answer to a standard problem. But the scenarios aren't standard problems, they're the points where the standard problem has deviated. So if I'm running the procedure, I'm already behind. I have to read what the aircraft is actually telling me first, and then decide whether the procedure fits what I'm reading. Del Torres was quiet for a moment. Week 1, he said. I told you about the 4 pilots who learned sideways. I remember. What I didn't tell you is why they all became exceptional. He set down his pen. Because they never stopped reading the aircraft. Even after they knew every procedure by heart. The procedures became background infrastructure. What they were always actually doing was listening. He looked at her. You're already doing that. You've been doing it since before you got here. She thought about the night the port engine started roughening 20 minutes before it failed. I know, she said. The weeks built on each other with the specific momentum of things that are working not smoothly, not without friction, but with the forward movement of a process that is at its core correctly aligned with the person going through it. She called Tanner on week 5. He had been discharged from the hospital. He was doing his physical therapy with the same argumentative intensity. He'd applied to his discharge timeline, and his progress was according to the report she'd gotten through Ortega ahead of schedule in the ways that could be measured, and exactly on schedule in the ways that couldn't. "How's the training?" he asked. "Hard," she said. "Good hard or bad hard?" "The kind that makes sense," she said. "Del Torres." "I know Del Torres," Tanner said. "We served together briefly about 10 years ago. He's the best fixed rotary instructor I've ever seen. Possibly the most demanding." Yes," Maya said. "Both of those things." "Is he giving you the speech yet?" She paused. "Which speech?" "He gives it to every student he believes in," Tanner said. "Around week 5 or 6. About the difference between a pilot who flies the aircraft and a pilot the aircraft flies with." She thought about the debrief conversation. "He hasn't used those words," she said. "But I think I've been having the conversation." Tanner was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell you something I should have said before you left for the evaluation." "Tanner, let me finish." His voice had the quality it got when he was being direct about something that mattered. "I've been flying for 17 years. I know good instinct when I'm in the aircraft next to it. That night, what I felt from your hands on the controls in the moments I was conscious enough to register it, that wasn't someone who had never flown." He paused. "I don't know what you are, Reynolds, but you are not someone who doesn't belong in an aircraft." She looked at the wall. She felt the familiar combination of things: gratitude, discomfort, the instinct to redirect. This time she let Hayes's voice override that instinct. Let him. "Thank you," she said. "Just that." "When do you fish?" Tanner asked. 8 more weeks. "I'll be recertified before that," he said. She smiled. "I know. Maybe I'll be there when you finish." "Maybe," she said. "If your physical therapy cooperates." "My physical therapy," Tanner said, "does what it's told." She didn't bother arguing with that. Week 6 brought the first real emergency. Not a simulated one. Not a scenario designed by people who understood failure points. A real one. They were on a dual-control training flight. Maya and Del Torres running approach patterns in the early evening when the tail rotor pedal went soft under her left foot. Not failed soft. The distinction matters enormously because a soft pedal means the system is degrading and has not yet failed, which means you have some time and some options, neither of which you have when the pedal fails completely. Maya felt it before Del Torres did. She knew this because he was talking something about her approach angle, which had been 2 degrees off, and she said, interrupting him mid-sentence, "Tail rotor pedal, left, it's soft." Del Torres stopped talking. His foot found the pedal. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "I've got it," he said. "I'm taking controls." "Yes," she said, and released cleanly, completely. No hesitation, no resistance. The transfer of controls done with the absolute correctness of someone who understood that this was not the moment for ambiguity about who was flying. Del Torres handled the degraded system with the particular unhurried precision of someone who has had this problem before and understood its specific grammar. He brought them down to a controlled landing in a field adjacent to the training area, with the aircraft settled and the rotor stopped before Maya had fully registered that they were on the ground. Silence. "You felt that first," Del Torres said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." "How?" "The pressure differential. Left pedal was giving more than it should for the input I was making. The system was compensating." He was quiet. "I was 2 degrees off on the approach," she said. "I know. I was working on correcting it when—" "The approach doesn't matter," he said. She looked at him. "You felt the system degrading before the instruments showed it," he said. "You called it immediately. You transferred controls cleanly without being asked." He looked straight ahead. "You just demonstrated 3 things that pilots spend years acquiring and that some never acquire at all." "You would have felt it within a few seconds," she said. "Probably. Maybe." He turned to look at her. "The few seconds isn't the point. The clean transfer is the point. You did not hesitate, and you did not hold on, and you did not let your ego get between the problem and the solution. He paused. Do you know how many pilots, experienced qualified pilots, fail that specific moment? I can imagine. No, he said. You can't. Not until you've seen it. He was quiet for a moment. I've been instructing for 15 years. I've had students freeze on the transfer. I've had students transfer and immediately reach back for the controls. I've had students argue about who felt it first. He paused. You said yes and let go. It was the right thing to do, she said. I know it was the right thing to do, Del Torres said. So does every instructor who's ever sat in that seat. That doesn't explain why so few people do it. She thought about Tanner's hands on the controls that night, fighting an aircraft that was trying to become a falling object. She thought about the moment she'd reached across him, not to take over, but to support. To add to what he had, rather than replace it. You don't hold on when holding on makes things worse, she said. That's not strength. That's just stubbornness with a bad outcome. Del Torres looked at her for a long time. All right, he said. He pulled his radio. Let's get ground crew out here, and then we're flying this afternoon session in a different bird. We're still doing the afternoon session. You just handled a real tail rotor degradation and called it before the instruments did. The afternoon session is the least interesting thing that's happened to you today. He keyed the radio. And Reynolds, sir. 2 degrees off on the approach. Fix it. Yes, she said. She almost smiled. The twist came in week 7, and it came from a direction she hadn't been looking. She was in the evening debrief when her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Phones went off during debrief, that was the rule, and the rule existed for reasons she agreed with. It buzzed again. She silenced it. Then Del Torres's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with the expression of a man who has agreed to be available for a specific category of interruption, and that expression told her that this was that category. He looked at her. Step out for a minute. She stepped out. She looked at her phone. 3 missed calls. Hayes. Webb. And 1 number she didn't immediately recognize. She called Hayes first. He picked up immediately. Where are you? Debrief. What happened? The investigation, Hayes said. The original one. They've reopened it. She went very still. What? The jamming signal from that night. Intelligence finished their full analysis. She could hear him choosing words with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been briefed on something and is now reconstructing it for someone else. The signal pattern, they've identified the origin. It wasn't standard enemy electronic warfare. Hayes. It was compromised equipment. Ours. A pause. Someone ran an active jamming frequency from inside the forward operating base network. Someone with access to the system architecture patched it into the sector coverage 3 hours before our mission went wheels up. The silence that followed was not peaceful. Someone inside the phobie jammed our communications, Maya said. Not a question. A statement that she was making herself say out loud to confirm it was real. The intelligence analysis says the probability is 94%, Hayes said. And it wasn't aimed at us specifically, we were collateral. It was aimed at shutting down all comms in that sector for a 2-hour window. To protect something else, she said. To protect someone else, Hayes said. An asset, an operation, something that couldn't afford radio traffic in that window. He paused. The question is whether the person who ran the jamming knew there was an active rescue mission in that sector. If they knew, Maya said carefully, then the port engine isn't just mechanical failure and bad luck. No, Hayes said. It isn't. She put her back against the wall. She thought about the darkness below the aircraft that night. The darkness that hadn't felt like ordinary darkness. She thought about the activity reports that were 4 hours old. She thought about Tanner saying, "Neither do I," when she'd told him she didn't like what she wasn't seeing. Who? She asked. That's what they're working on. That's why the investigation is reopened. His voice was measured. But underneath it, she could hear the specific anger of a man who is very good at controlling anger because he's been angry for a long time and has learned that the controlled version is more effective than the released one. And Reynolds, there's something else. Tell me. The FOB commander for that sector during the time of the mission. He's been flagged. A pause. He submitted the mission parameters. He approved the launch window. He signed off on the enemy activity reports that were 4 hours out of date. The thing that had been sitting at the edge of her understanding since the night above Syria. The wrongness she'd felt before they'd entered hostile airspace. The specific quality of the intelligence that had been too quiet shifted. Not new information. Old information with new context. He knew we were going, she said. He knew everything about the mission, Hayes said. The timing, the route, the personnel, all of it. But you're saying he may not have known about the jamming. Or he did, and he considered it acceptable risk. Hayes's voice went very flat. 6 people nearly died, Maya. 4 of my team were wounded. Tanner has a skull fracture. You have fractured ribs and a concussion. He stopped. That's not acceptable risk. That's not anything I have language for that keeps me from saying things I shouldn't say on a recorded line. She understood. She felt the same thing, the same hot, clean anger underneath the processing, the same need to hold it correctly so it didn't become something less useful than what it was. Is this going to affect the training? She asked. I don't know. Ortega's been briefed. He's trying to contain it. A pause. But you should know. You deserve to know before it becomes official. Thank you, she said. Reynolds. His voice changed again. Whatever comes next, the investigation, the proceedings, whatever they make it, you didn't do anything wrong. You made a call on bad information. That's not on you. Someone made that information bad, she said. Yes, Hayes said. And they're going to have to explain that. Del Torres was waiting when she came back in. The 2 other students were gone. He'd dismissed them, which told her he already knew. Someone had reached him before Hayes had reached her. She sat down across from him. Ortega called, he said. Hayes called me, she said. How are you? The question was direct, not performative. Processing, she said. And angry, in that order. What's the anger at? She thought about it. At the idea that the night might not have been random. That the conditions we flew into, the jamming, the outdated reports might not have been coincidence. She paused. We went in with a broken picture. And if someone made that picture broken deliberately. Does it change what you did? Del Torres asked. She looked at him. What? What you did that night, he said. The medical work, the cockpit, getting everyone down. He looked at her steadily. Does what you just learned change any of it? She thought about Park's eyes finding her voice. She thought about Tanner's hands. She thought about Hayes saying go home anyway. No, she said. Then the anger is valid, Del Torres said. And the investigation will go where it goes. But what you did that night is what you did. No investigation changes that. He paused. Can you keep training? Yes, she said immediately. Without this consuming the headspace you need for the next 8 weeks. She thought about Harlow's words. The distinction between pushing through a signal and heeding one. I can compartmentalize, she said. Not forever, but long enough. Long enough is all we need, he said. After you're qualified, you can give it whatever space it needs. He looked at her. This is not me minimizing it. I want that clear. What you just described is serious and it's going to matter. But you can't carry it into the aircraft. Not this aircraft, not in this phase of training. I know, she said. Then we're back in the room tomorrow at 05:30, he said. I'll be there, she said. He nodded, got up, then stopped at the door. Reynolds. Sir. What Ortega told me about the investigation, the FOB commander, the jamming signal. There's a phrase the intelligence people used in their analysis. He turned around. They said the rescue mission had proceeded despite conditions specifically adverse to its success. He paused. They didn't say that like it was a neutral fact. They said it like it was remarkable, like the word despite was doing more work than usual. She held his gaze. Despite is the right word, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. She called Webb that night. He answered with the background noise of somewhere that was not quiet voices movement, and she could tell he was at the hospital, which meant he was with Park. "I heard," he said immediately. "Everyone seems to have heard," she said. "Hayes doesn't keep things compartmentalized well when he's angry," Webb said. "Usually he's very good at it. But this particular piece of information..." She could hear him step somewhere quieter. "How are you?" Del Torres asked me the same thing. I told him I was processing and angry. "Still in that order," she considered. "They've moved closer together." "That's honest." A pause. "Park's doing his second PT session," Webb said, and the shift in his voice was slight but real, the way it changed when he was about to give her something he knew she needed. "They had him walk the full length of the ward today, without stopping." She closed her eyes. Webb, she said. "I know," he said. "I know." They were quiet for the moment, the two of them, with the weight of everything. The investigation had just added sitting alongside everything that Park walking the full length of the ward meant, and the two things in balance, not canceling each other out, but existing simultaneously. The way reality insists on existing in both its worst and its finest versions at once. "He asked me again today," Webb said, "about you, what you were doing." "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were learning to fly." A pause. "He said that made sense." "Why?" He said. Webb paused, and she could hear something in his voice that he was managing carefully. "He said anyone who could keep him breathing in a falling aircraft already knew how to fly. They just needed the paper to say so." The anger and the processing and the heat of everything the day had delivered settled for a moment into something quieter. "Tell him thank you," she said. "Tell him yourself," Webb said. "You've got 8 weeks. He'll be walking a lot farther than a ward by then." She looked at the ceiling of her quarters. She thought about Monday. She thought about Del Torres and 0530 and the aircraft that had a tail rotor pedal that went soft under her left foot and landed in a field while she'd said yes and let go. She thought about what came next, not with fear, not with the clean absence of it either, with the realistic, grounded, clear-eyed awareness of a person who has been through enough to know that next is not a threat. It is simply what follows from the decision to keep going, and she had always kept going. "Webb," she said. "Yeah." "Get some sleep," she said. "You've been at that hospital every day." "Park doesn't have family nearby," he said simply. "I know," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just finish the training." 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, he said. "We'll all be here." She hung up and sat in the quiet of her quarters, and she let the anger sit where it was present, acknowledged, contained. And she let Park walking the full length of the ward sit alongside it, and she let Del Torres's 0530 sit beyond both of them waiting, and she let herself be someone who held all of it at once, without being crushed by any of it. That was she had come to understand, not a skill she had acquired. It was who she was. And 8 weeks from now, when she walked out of this program, with the qualification that the system was finally officially catching up to provide, she would still be exactly this person. But the world would finally have the paperwork to prove it. The 8 weeks did not pass quickly. They passed the way. Hard things pass. Not fast, not slow, but with the specific weight of time that is being used fully every hour, accounted for, nothing wasted. Maya flew in the mornings and studied in the evenings and slept in the narrow space between, and she did not think about the investigation more than it deserved, which was a discipline that required daily maintenance, but held. Del Torres pushed her harder in the final weeks than he had in the first. Not because she was struggling, because she wasn't, and he knew that comfort was the most dangerous condition a developing pilot could be in. He gave her scenarios that had no clean solutions, only least bad ones, and he watched how she chose. He gave her weather conditions at the edge of training parameters and watched how she read them. He gave her night flights with degraded instrumentation and watched what her hands did when her eyes couldn't tell her what she needed to know. What her hands did was right. Consistently, instinctively, without the half-second lag of someone translating knowledge into action. The translation was gone. What lived in its place was something that had no good word except the one Del Torres had used in week 1 recognition. She recognized what the aircraft was telling her. She responded to it the way you respond to a voice you know. On the Thursday of the final week, Del Torres ran her through the most demanding scenario in the program's curriculum. A simulated engine failure at low altitude over hostile terrain at night, with 3 simulated casualties in the cabin and a communication system that failed completely 40 seconds into the scenario. The scenario had a specific failure point built into it, a moment approximately 3 minutes in, where the only correct action was to make a decision that felt wrong, that every instinct would resist, because the correct answer and the intuitive answer pointed in opposite directions. Every student in the program's history had hesitated at that moment. Most had chosen wrong. Maya did not hesitate. She chose correctly. And when the scenario ended and the simulation powered down and Del Torres sat in the silence for a moment before speaking, she knew from the quality of that silence that something had been settled. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "Syria," she said. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I figured." The qualification ceremony was not a ceremony in any formal sense. The program did not do formal. What it did was this: on a Friday morning, the students who had completed the program stood in the briefing room while Del Torres and Sue and 2 people from command, whom Maya didn't know, reviewed the final assessments, asked 3 questions each, and then shook hands. Castillo finished. Park the other Park finished. Maya finished. When Sue shook her hand, she held it for a fraction of a second longer than the handshake required, and she said quietly enough that it was only for Maya. "I told you in week 1 that you were earning it. You earned it." Maya said, "Thank you for making it real." Sue looked at her. "What does that mean?" "The evaluation could have been a formality," Maya said. "A rubber stamp on what happened in Syria. You didn't let it be that. You made me actually prove it." She paused. "That matters more than the qualification. Because now I know it's mine." Sue held her gaze for a moment. "That," she said, "is exactly the right understanding." She released her hand. Del Torres was last. He didn't say much. He was not a man who used occasions as excuses for speeches. He shook her hand and said, "Good flying, Reynolds." And then, because he was Del Torres, and because 15 years of instructing had given him both the right and the precision to say the exact thing, "Don't stop listening to the aircraft." "Never," she said. He nodded. That was enough. She called Hayes from the parking area outside the facility before she'd even reached her car. He picked up on the first ring. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. There was a pause on his end. Not the pause of a man who didn't know what to say, the pause of a man who was letting something land the way it deserved to land. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Reynolds," he said. Formal, deliberate, with every syllable chosen. She felt something tighten in her throat that she decided to ignore. "Thank you, Sergeant Hayes." "How do you feel?" She stood in the open air and thought about the honest answer. "Like the world is the same size it was yesterday, but I fit in it differently," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's the right feeling," he said. "That's exactly the right feeling." "How's the leg?" "Fully operational," he said. "Cleared for duty 2 weeks ago." "You didn't tell me. I didn't want you thinking about anything except finishing," he said. "Which is exactly why I didn't tell you." She shook her head slowly. "You're very strategic for someone who claims to be direct." "Direct and strategic aren't mutually exclusive," he said. "Then, Reynolds, there's something you need to know." The shift in his voice was slight, but she caught it, the shift from warmth to the flatness he used when the thing he was about to say was significant. "The investigation," she said. "They found him," Hayes said. 3 days ago. The Phobie commander, Colonel Warren Briggs. They've had him in a formal proceeding for 72 hours. A pause. He signed off on the mission launch knowing the jamming window was active. He knew. He made a decision that the operation the jamming was protecting was worth more than the risk to our aircraft. She absorbed this. He named an asset, she asked. A network. A source they'd been running for 8 months, who was meeting a contact in that sector during the jamming window. Briggs made the call that protecting the intelligence was the priority. Hayes's voice was very controlled. His defense is that he calculated acceptable risk, that the rescue mission would adapt to conditions. We did adapt, Maya said. People almost died doing it. Yes, Hayes said. And that's the part his calculation didn't adequately weight. He paused. He's being separated. Criminal proceedings are pending. The intelligence network, which the investigation has now also compromised incidentally, because everything in his decision-making chain has had to be reviewed, is being dismantled. Maya thought about the night, about the 4-hour-old reports, about Tanner saying, "Neither do I," about the moment she'd known in the specific wordless way she knew things, that the darkness below them was wrong. Did his network produce anything that justified it? She asked. The 8 months, the asset, any of it. The intelligence review says partial actionable product, Hayes said, which in plain language means some of it was useful and some of it wasn't, and nobody can say with certainty whether the useful parts couldn't have been obtained another way. He paused. What they can say with certainty is that 7 people nearly died for a calculation that was made by one person without informing anyone in the operational chain. He didn't tell Ortega, she said. Ortega didn't know anything, Hayes said. When he found out last week, Hayes stopped. Let's say his reaction was not professionally contained. She could imagine it. Ortega, who had sent her into a mission with a broken picture, not knowing the picture was broken because someone above him had chosen not to complete it. How is he? She asked. Angry, Hayes said. But directing it correctly. He's been in Washington 3 times in the last 2 weeks. He's not letting this become a procedural footnote. Good, she said. There's more, Hayes said. She waited. The recommendation I filed, he said. Hayes's recommendation, the one Fitzgerald endorsed, the one that started the evaluation process. It's been formally entered into a broader policy review. He paused. Reynolds, the review is looking at the qualification pathways, the gap between what the regulations say and what situations like Syria actually require. The people writing the review are using your case as the primary example. She was very still. My case, she said. Your case, he said. 1 aircraft, 1 night, 1 person who did what needed doing and then had to navigate a system that didn't have a category for it. His voice was careful, measured, carrying something that was neither pride nor sentimentality, but was made of adjacent material. They're building the category. She looked at the sky. Clear. The kind of blue that has depth to it that goes somewhere. That's going to take years, she said. Yes, Hayes said. But it starts now. And it starts because of that night. A pause. You didn't just bring 7 people home, Maya. You showed the system something it couldn't unsee. She drove back to the base. Ortega met her at the entrance to his office building, which was not standard. He did not generally come to the entrance for anyone. He was standing outside with the specific posture of a man who has decided that normal procedure is insufficient for the occasion. Reynolds, he said. Sir, she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. He held it for a moment. I owe you an apology, he said. She looked at him. Sir. Don't, he said. Let me say it. I sent you on a mission with information I trusted and shouldn't have trusted without verification. I didn't question the activity reports. I didn't push back on the launch window. He looked at her directly. You questioned both, before you left. I overrode your concern with operational urgency. He paused. I was wrong. The mission succeeded, she said. The mission nearly killed 7 people, he said. That it succeeded is a testament to you and Tanner and everyone on that aircraft. It is not a vindication of my decision-making. He released her hand. I needed to say that to your face. She looked at him. He was not performing this. He was not a man who performed things. He was standing in the uncomfortable truth of it and offering it to her without decoration. I heard you, she said. Thank you. He nodded. They went inside. The debrief on the investigation findings lasted 2 hours and produced in Maya a complex, layered reaction that she did not try to simplify. Anger at Briggs clean, justified, not useful to dwell in. Something more ambivalent about the intelligence network and the asset and the impossible calculus of operations that required people to be weighed against information. Clarity about Ortega, that he was a man trying to be accountable, and that accountability after the fact, while insufficient, was not nothing. And underneath all of it, something that she kept returning to, the awareness that everything Briggs had calculated against them had not been enough. Not because she was invincible, not because they had been lucky though luck had been present, but because every person on that aircraft had done the thing that was right in front of them to do, without waiting for the conditions to be ideal, without the luxury of knowing the full picture. They had flown into a broken situation and held it together with their hands and their voices and their refusal to stop. No calculation had accounted for that. No calculation could. Tanner was at the base when she returned. She found him in the hangar. Of course, she found him in the hangar, standing beside an HH-60 Pavehawk, with the proprietary attention of a man reacquainting himself with something he had been separated from too long. He had lost some weight during the recovery, and his face showed it, but his eyes were the same steady, direct, operating at full capacity. He turned when he heard her. She saw the exact moment he registered the qualification insignia. "There it is," he said. "There it is," she said. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her across the cockpit that last night, with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who is seeing exactly what is there. "How does it feel?" he asked. "You asked me something like that once before," she said. "In the cockpit. You asked if I thought I could do it." "And you said you could," he said. "And you gave me 2 minutes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad I did." "So am I," she said. "How's the head cleared?" he said. "All the way. Flight surgeon signed off last week." "Del Torres said you served together." "Briefly," Tanner said. "Long enough for me to know he's the best there is at what he does." He paused. "He called me, after your final assessment." She looked at him. "He called you." "He called to tell me what he saw," Tanner said. "He said," he stopped, started again. "He said he'd been instructing for 15 years, and that you were the only student he'd had who learned the aircraft the way a musician learns an instrument, from the inside, by listening to it rather than operating it." He looked at her. "He said it like I should know what that means." "Do you?" she asked. "Yes," Tanner said simply. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the specific comfortable silence of two people who have been through the same impossible thing and carry it in the same place. "I want to fly with you," Tanner said. "When they assign you. If the assignment works out, if we're in the same sector, I want to be in the aircraft with you." "You're not worried," she said. He looked at her with the expression that was as close as he ever got to amused. "About flying with someone who held a damaged aircraft together with one hand while doing emergency surgery with the other." He paused. "No, Reynolds, I'm not worried." She almost laughed. It came out as something quieter, a release of breath, a settling. "Deal," she said. 3 days later, the base gathered. Not officially. There was no order, no announcement, no command directive requiring anyone to be anywhere. What happened was simpler and harder to explain. Word moved through the base the way word moves through communities of people who work closely and trust each other's assessments, person to person, quickly, without ceremony. Reynolds was back. The qualification was done. And the investigation findings, now officially released, had confirmed what everyone who'd been paying attention already understood, that the night above Syria had been set up to fail, and that it had not failed because of what happened inside one aircraft during the worst 40 minutes of everyone aboard's professional life. People came to the runway, not all at once, not in formation. They came the way people come when they want to be somewhere without being told to be there, individually, in small groups, with the unrehearsed quality of something genuine. By the time Maya walked from the operations building toward the flight line for her first assigned mission briefing, there were more people along the runway than she had expected. Many of them she knew. Many of them she didn't. She saw Webb first. He was standing with Park Corporal Park, her Park walking steadily with a cane that he handled with the deliberate ease of someone who had been practicing, and the sight of Park upright present, looking at her with eyes that were fully there and fully conscious, did something to her chest that she did not try to manage. She went to him first. "Corporal Park," she said. "Lieutenant Reynolds," he said. His voice was slightly different than she remembered, softer something in it that hadn't been there in the aircraft. He'd been told she understood. He'd been told exactly what had happened and by whom. "I'm told you held my head." "I did," she said. "Through the crash." "Yes." He looked at her. He was not a demonstrative person, she could see that in the way he stood and the economy of his expression. But he was looking at her with something that had no adequate civilian translation. The look of a person acknowledging the debt they know cannot be repaid and have decided to acknowledge anyway fully, without pretending it is smaller than it is. "Thank you," he said. She held his gaze. "You looked at me," she said. "In the aircraft. When I told you to look at me, you looked. That's what I needed. We did it together." He considered this. Something shifted in his face. "I don't remember that," he said. "I know," she said. "I do." He nodded once slowly. Webb beside him was looking at the tarmac. She could see from the set of his jaw that he was managing something, and she decided to give him the space to manage it rather than acknowledge it, because that was how Webb worked, and she knew it. "Good to see you, Ambulatory Park," she said. "Good to be it," he said with the dry flatness of someone who has thought about the alternative enough to mean that completely. Hayes was farther along the runway. He was standing straight. The leg, she noted, carried no indication of the shrapnel wound that had been there 2 months ago. He had his hands clasped in front of him, and the expression he wore when he was being exactly present, not performing presence, but actually in it. She walked to him. He looked at her, the way he'd looked at her in the Phobie hospital corridor, with the assessment of a man who has seen someone at their absolute limit, and is now seeing them beyond it. "How do you feel?" he asked. "You keep asking me that," she said. "You keep giving me different answers," he said. "That's why I keep asking." She thought about it. About the qualification and the investigation, and Tanner in the hangar, and Park walking with a cane, and Del Torres's voice saying, "Don't stop listening to the aircraft." "Like it was worth it," she said. "All of it. Even the parts that shouldn't have happened." He held her gaze. "That's a hard thing to say and mean simultaneously." "I mean it," she said. "I don't excuse Briggs. I don't minimize what he did. But the night happened, and what came out of it." She paused. "Park is walking. Tanner is flying. You're standing on 2 legs. Okafor went home and held his daughter." She looked at Hayes directly. "And the policy review is happening. The category is being built. The next person who does what I did in that cockpit won't have to navigate a system that doesn't have a word for them." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this," he said. "I've had 8 weeks of training and not enough sleep," she said. "You do a lot of thinking." He looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, and was not quite anything else. Just the specific warmth of a person who has come to know someone well enough to recognize when they're being completely themselves. "The policy review," he said. "You know they're naming the evaluation framework after the incident." She blinked. "What?" "The accelerated qualification pathway," he said. "The formal version they're building into regulation, the documentation from command, used the incident as the foundational case. The framework is being called—" He paused. "The Syria Protocol." She stared at him. "I didn't know that," she said. "Ortega told me yesterday," Hayes said. "I think he was waiting for today to tell you, but—" A hint of something in his voice. "I have a problem with delayed information, as you know." "Hayes," she said, "they're naming a policy framework after that night." "After what you did that night," he said. "Yes." She stood with that. It was too large to fully hold in any single moment. She could feel the edges of it, but not the whole shape. A night that should have been the end of 7 people had become, through what those people had done in it, the beginning of something institutional. Something that would exist in regulations and training programs and qualification pathways long after everyone who had been on that aircraft had retired or moved on. The Syria Protocol. She thought about the port engine failing. She thought about reaching for the controls. She thought about the 3 seconds Tanner had looked at her before saying 2 minutes. "He's going to be insufferable about this," she said. Hayes looked confused for a moment. "Tanner," she said. "When he finds out." Hayes blinked. And then, for the first time in her experience of him, Sergeant First Class Caleb Hayes, 14 years of combat service, the man who had run out of time for indirect? He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprises the person doing it. She laughed too. Standing on the runway with Park and Webb, 20 feet away, and 200 people she knew and didn't know, arranged along the flight line, in the unrehearsed, genuine way of people who had simply wanted to be there. She laughed, and it felt like the final thing that had been tightly held coming loose, releasing, becoming something it hadn't been before. The formal moment came quietly. Ortega stepped forward from where he'd been standing, and he did not make a speech. He was not a man who made speeches, but he did say in a voice that was measured and clear and carried to everyone within range. "Lieutenant Reynolds, the United States Air Force would like to officially and formally welcome you to flight status." He presented the wings. She had been presented with things before commendations, unit citations, the quiet acknowledgments that accumulate in a military career. None of them had felt like this. Not because this was more important in the abstract, but because of what it had cost to get here and what it meant that she had gotten here anyway. She accepted the wings. She looked at them in her palm. Tanner started it. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and produced the specific piercing whistle of a man who spent years in loud environments and learned to make himself heard above them. And that sound broke whatever formal quality the moment had been holding. And then it was just people, soldiers, air crew, medical staff, support personnel, people who knew her and people who knew only what she'd done, making noise in the way humans make noise when something real has happened, and formality is insufficient to contain it. Park raised his cane in the air. Webb beside him finally stopped managing whatever he'd been managing and let his face do what it had been trying to do, which was be entirely undone by the moment, briefly and honestly. Okafor, she hadn't known he was there, let out a sound that was part laugh and part something else entirely from somewhere to her left. Hayes stood straight. He did not make noise. He looked at her across the space between them with the complete, unhurried attention of a man who is witnessing something he will not forget. And that was enough. That was more than enough. Maya held the wings. She thought about 11:47 p.m., and a radio screaming, and boots pulled back on in the dark. She thought about Tanner's voice saying we kept us in the air. She thought about the port engine dying, and her hands finding the controls, and the decision that had already been made before she made it. Made by every training day, every mission, every person who had ever trusted her with something that mattered. She thought about Park's eyes finding her voice. She thought about what Harlow had said, the gap between terror and action, and what she had said back to him. The decision was already made. It had always been already made. She pinned the wings herself. She looked up at the sky, the same deep directional blue she'd looked at outside the qualification facility, the blue that goes somewhere, and she felt the thing that she had been moving toward for the entire 8 weeks, and before that for the entire recovery, and before that for the entire night above Syria, and before that for every year of her career that had been building toward a moment she couldn't have named but would have recognized anywhere. She felt it settle. Not completion in the sense of ending. Completion in the sense of a structure becoming whole. Every piece placed the architecture revealed the thing finally recognizable as itself. She looked back at the people on the runway. At Park standing. At Webb, undone. At Okafor, who had gone home and held his daughter. At Hayes, who had run out of time for indirect and had submitted the recommendation and called her before the information was official, and laughed. Actually laughed on the runway in front of 200 people. At Tanner, who had come to the hangar, who had called Del Torres, who had signed the corroboration from a hospital bed, and said we kept us in the air, and meant both syllables of that we, with everything he had. At Ortega, who had stood outside his building and said I was wrong, and meant that too. At all of them. She thought about what Hayes had said on that valley floor in the dark, with enemy fire on 3 sides, and a damaged helicopter above them, and nothing rational, suggesting that any of them should make it home. Go home anyway. She had gone home anyway. Not because the conditions were right. Not because the system had been ready for her. Not because someone had built the pathway before she arrived at it. She had gone home because she had refused to leave anyone behind. And that refusal, that single, non-negotiable, absolute refusal, had turned out to be the most powerful thing on the battlefield that night. More powerful than the jamming signal. More powerful than Briggs's calculation. More powerful than an aircraft that was falling and an engine that was dying, and a situation that had been designed deliberately or not to end in catastrophe. One person who refused. One decision that had already been made. That was what the Syria Protocol was built on. That was what the wings in her hand represented. That was what every person standing on this runway had come to witness, not a ceremony, not a formality, but the evidence that when everything is stripped away and the systems fail and the calculations collapse, what remains is the human being who decides. And the human being, if they are the right human being, decides to stay. Lieutenant Maya Reynolds looked at the sky one more time. Then she looked at the people who had come home with her. And she smiled, not the managed almost smile of someone holding things together, but the real one, the uncalculated one. The one that comes when you have arrived somewhere that is exactly where you were always supposed to be. She had brought them home, every one of them, and she was never, not for a single moment of that impossible night, or any of the days that followed, going to apologize for how